Liss, and the name of the program is The Way to Go. I invite you to join me each week at this time as we explore places to go and things to do. Today we're going to be making faces because that's the name of an exhibit at the Hudson River Museum. They'll be running through August, and it's an exhibit that covers 200 years of American portraiture. And we're fortunate to have with us today two of the people who are very much involved and responsible for this wonderful exhibit. Phillip Verre, who is the director of the Hudson River Museum, and Cathy Shiga, I'll do it, Cathy, Gattulo.
Well done.
Who is the director of education. And I told you I have trouble with your name, Cathy. And it's great that you could both come here and talk with us today about portraits and what's happened to them.
Thank you for having us.
It's always a pleasure. You know, you've been on this program many times, and every time you have a new exhibit, it's a delight to bring you in here and talk about it. So let's talk about portraits. What do portraits tell us of the people who are the subjects and of the people who are doing the portraits? What's the message?
Well, I think portraiture is the one genre where you have an incredible, fertile dialogue between the sitter, the artist, and the viewer, where each brings something to that definition.
Yeah, you've added something to that. I said the artist and the subject, and you added the viewer who brings something to it.
Because the artist brings his or her own perspective to it. The sitter obviously brings a perspective to it, but I think also in terms of the viewer and what we've seen at the exhibition, the viewer brings something. Sometimes the viewer fills in the gaps, perhaps, that if you know something about a particular person, be it a public historical figure or a contemporary person who is actually portrayed, he or she brings something to that formula. So it's really a very fertile intersection which takes place when viewing, when painting, when exhibiting a portrait.
This exhibit covers a vast number of media, really. It's not just paintings, it's not just photography, it's not just sculpture. It covers many things. Was it difficult in putting this together, in selecting all of these elements and deciding what's going to go into it?
Well, I think that it wasn't so much a matter of having trouble finding images or deciding what media we wanted to include, but because there was such a huge range of kinds of portraits, it was really kind of trying to decide how we were going to cull the pieces for the show. What was our criteria? How are we going to organize it?
So it was a question more of, we've got thousands and thousands of pieces, which ones are we going to use? And how is that decision made? What's the process? I mean, there was got to be a process of elimination, I suppose.
Absolutely.
What's the process?
Well, the way we approach exhibits at the Hudson River Museum is via the team concept, and we have a number of people determining how an exhibition looks. There's Cathy and myself, but then there's also our curator of public programs, our curator of collections, as well as our director of design. And we start with a premise. Someone will bring a premise to the table, and through a series of dialogues, both which are difficult at times, as you might imagine, when you have 5 people sitting down at a table saying, well, what is this show going to look like? We sort of hammer out basically the theme of an exhibit, what types of objects will be included, how those objects are interpreted, how they are installed, and ultimately the look of any one exhibition. And it's truly a team process, and it takes a lot of time. And
Phillip, you mentioned the fact not only what are the items, but how is it going to look? The museum itself, I guess as all museums do, it lends itself to different configurations. You have an exhibit space, but you can break it up in many different ways, and it seems it's always different.
Sure. Well, the space lends itself to a variety of presentations, but also how an exhibit looks not only means the physical aspect of laying out a show and designing a show, but also how do you interpret it? What sort of label copy do you have? What sort of questions do you ask? As you know, in this exhibit, we probably raise a lot more questions than provide information or answers, and that's intentional because we want to provoke and engage our audience.
Those labels are fascinating, and as director of education, I guess this is an educational exhibit. I don't want to put some sort of a negative aspect. People say, I'm going there and I'm going to get education, but it is very educating.
Well, I think
because those, I've been back twice and it's not enough. And you can stand and read those labels and it makes you think. How? Why? How did you get to this point of doing it this way? Not usually done, I don't think.
Well, I think exhibits in general, we hope to have some kind of learning experience going on, interpretation of objects in general or themes in general in an exhibit. We're hoping that the visitor is coming away with something. The questions, the focus on the questions in the portrait show very much came out of the team process that Phillip just described. We found that as we were discussing the topic of portraiture, what was most interesting were the questions we were raising and the fact that we really couldn't come to a consensus, and we tried to find ways that we could transfer or include the public in that dialogue as well. How can the public define for themselves what a portrait is? And really the way we did that was by putting the questions directly into the exhibit and organizing the exhibit around those questions.
Let's talk about some specifics. What's in the exhibit? That's a broad question for you.
We have over 110 objects and covering 200 years, as you mentioned, covering a variety of mediums from painting, sculpture, photography. We have the popular arts. We have material culture. So we have an Elvis clock. We have postage stamps. We have baseball cards. We have magazine covers. We have the great traditional portraits by people like Akins and the Gilbert Stuart George Washington. And we have some more challenging portraits by abstract painters like Elaine de Kooning and Richard Diebenkorn. We have some wonderful photography which really changed the course of portraiture with its arrival in the mid-19th century. So we have some wonderful 19th century portraiture as well as some wonderful contemporary portraiture. We have videos, we have three-dimensional sculpture. So it's really portraiture as we define it really reflects everything which is going on both in the fine arts as well as in everyday life. And that's sort of one of the ways of, again, reaching out and bringing in a much larger audience is to show people that portraiture isn't something which is dated and you had to be rich to have a portrait. You could look on a postage stamp or on a box of Wheaties and see Michael Jordan and hey, that's a portrait.
So a portrait is anything that shows somebody, but it doesn't necessarily have to show a face, does it?
No, as we talked before, there are some portraits in the show which are without sitters, with perhaps have their setting or part of a body, such as a pair of hands, etc., which might be as revealing as a face.
I particularly like Alex Katz. I want to talk about that and what it is, and it's kind of a shocker.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting sort of cutout, aluminum cutout, so it's a freestanding sculpture, but it's very flat. It's basically two-dimensional.
Which is typical of what he does.
Exactly, and sort of has a front and back portrait of this person, and you sort of have to walk around to get the whole thing, but yet somehow it's unresolved and still sort of quizzical in terms of how it was done and what it reveals. And that's sort of in the spirit of the portrait show.
I think I ought to point out that if you approach it from the back, you see the backs of two men, and you turn around the other side, and you see the back of one of them again, but the face of the other, and that raises a lot of questions, doesn't it? As director of education, you work a lot with the schools. You have school programs
and public programs as well.
Public programs. And what does that entail?
Basically, we try to make whatever we have at the museum, which includes the planetarium and Glenview Mansion, relevant for the public.
How do you do that?
Through programming, which can include everything from artist workshops to performing arts, science workshops, hands-on kind of discovery-based activities for families, senior audiences, as well as for schools and teachers.
You do have worked with the two magnet schools, which you have right nearby.
Absolutely.
And some of the things that you brought along are a reflection of that. And perhaps at this point, I think I'm going to bring up and show something. Now, would we call this portraiture? Because actually, what it is a casting of a hand.
Well, it ties back to actually a 19th century tradition, or maybe even earlier than that, of artists or sculptors doing sculptures of people's hands. And I think it's debatable whether it could be a portrait or not. It was one of the questions the team actually never resolved, but it does bring up the question of how much identity can we learn from a hand. Today we have things like fingerprints, which can identify a person very, very specifically. So why not? Why not a hand?
Well, of course, you've let me in a little secret. It's your hand.
It is.
And why was this done?
That was part of the process of casting that we did with an artist who's included in the portrait show named Rigoberto Torres. And he worked with a class of students from the Museum Junior High School to do some casts of students in their class, their classmates, and kind of get them involved in his working process.
And, of course, he's quite an interesting story. And there's an exhibit, which I have seen at the Lehman College Gallery of a lot of his work. And he does actual castings of people, correct? And we do have here something that I think is excellent example of what he does. Let's talk about this. Where was this done?
This is Clarence. He's a student, a ninth grade student at the Museum Junior High School. And he was actually the first student that class cast. They work with live models, so it was cast directly on Clarence's face. The whole process took about 20 minutes. They make a mold out of dental material called Geltrate, which doesn't stick to you. They use it to make molds of teeth. And then from that mold, they create plaster casts like the one you see here.
And then he paints them.
Yes, and the students were very involved throughout the process, helping him mix up the materials and pour and carve down, things like that.
And part of the exhibit includes in the mansion some of the work that students have done, their own portraits and concepts that they got as a result of this. This is really remarkable. I think he's a young man who's really, I'm talking about Rigoberto Torres, who's really accomplished a great deal. He works with John Ahern, right?
That's right.
And a lot of the things he does. Let's get back to the exhibit itself and talk about some of the specifics. Now, what do you think is the most significant of the various things in there?
Oh, well, I have my few favorites. I think there's a wonderful Thomas Eakins portrait at the turn of the century, and I think Eakins is one of our great artists in terms of revealing sort of the psychological presence, the psychological biography of a sitter. I think there's also a couple wonderful works, as I mentioned before, by abstract artists from the 50s and 60s, Elaine de Kooning and Richard Diebenkorn, who really posed that question, how much information do you need to reveal to make it a portrait? And these are two artists who were on the verge of creating fully abstract works, but there are a couple portraits in the show from the 50s which sort of exist in that gray zone between representation and abstraction. We also have a wonderful, imaginative and truly creative quilt by Faith Ringgold, which is, again, sort of a history of her family. And again, she's combining generations of her family in one setting in a chapel by Matisse, and there's actually a wonderful storyline as well. But I think what's truly wonderful about the exhibit and what's my favorite is sort of the sum total. You know, we really created a wonderful story here with a lot of richness and a lot of depth and a lot of different pockets to explore. So it's really sort of as you said, you really need to come back, a couple times to really enjoy the fullness of the exhibit.
Yeah, unfortunately, when you go to a museum that is too big, you really haven't got time to see everything, and unless you're very selective, Metropolitan, for example, unless you're very selective and treat one or two exhibits as the whole museum and spend all your time there, you really whiz through and see nothing. And the nice thing about the Hudson River Museum is it's small enough so that you can see the exhibit and see it well. I did want to get back to the labels. Some of the questions that you ask or some of the things that you provoke. Can you remember some of them?
Well, each section of the exhibit is started or surrounded by a major question, and those questions tie back to kind of making those portraits in that section relevant to the viewer. For example, one of the questions is, how can a portrait convey a relationship or affection? So that can include things like a family portrait, as well as a marriage certificate we have from the 19th century, which shows photographs of the two people, so documents as portraits as well. Then individual questions on individual labels will tie to the particular piece, so that a person reading the label is not only getting information about the piece, but is also drawn back to the piece, kind of forced to look at it again, considering that question.
You just don't go right past it because it provokes further thought and what you're going to see there. Well, we'll get back to you in just a minute, but at this point, I do want to talk about something special for our viewers. I have a special offer for you today, and you might want to get your pen and paper ready. People ask me all the time, how does one know about the things that are available, interesting things that are taking place? Well, one of the ways, of course, is to read the newspapers and magazines and make notations of the things that you want to do, and put down the dates and decide which of them you want to use. Another way is to get on the mailing list of various museums, of various organizations, of people who do walking tours. I have prepared a list of these sources, which I will make available at no cost to anyone who will send me a self-addressed stamped envelope. So all you really have to do to get this list from me is to send a self-addressed stamped envelope to me, Norman Liss, care of Cable Television. It's 4 Martine Avenue in White Plains, New York, and the zip is 10601. And I'm going to put that address up on the credits at the end of the program so that you can write it down if you weren't prepared to do that. And by the way, if you have any thoughts about subjects that you think you might like covered on the way to go, just include a note about that, and perhaps we can do a future program on a subject that you suggest. And now I want to get back to my guests, and we're talking today about the great exhibit, Making Faces, which is at the Hudson River Museum, and my guests are Phillip Verre, who is the director of the Hudson River Museum, and I will get it straight this time, Cathy Shiga Gattulo, who is the director of education. You're nodding because I got your name right the second time.
Perfect.
One of the things that to me is very interesting is that this brochure that you put together, which I know normally when you go to an exhibit, there's a catalog, and you have to pay for the catalog. This happens to be a very good, concise brochure on the exhibit. It has a lot of illustrations and a lot of thoughts, and everybody who comes there will get one of these. And it is very worthwhile, and I suggest that people do make a point of picking one up when they get there. So let's get back to the exhibit now. What's the best way to see it? Start at the beginning?
Well, I think the way the exhibit is organized, we do have sort of an introductory station, which includes 5 works, which sort of sets the real broad parameters of the exhibit. And it's wonderful because that introductory station includes the well-known Gilbert Stuart portrait of George Washington. It includes a beautiful turn-of-the-century work by Albert Thayer of a woman in her wedding gown. We have a semi-abstract work by the contemporary artist Lois Lane. We have a Chris Couture portrait, which is really a mirror. So you're looking at yourself, and there's an expression. I've seen that look on your face before. And then the introductory station ends with a T-shirt from the Civil Rights Museum of an image of Malcolm X. So within those 5 images, we sort of cover the broadest bases, and we raise a lot of the questions, which will then be again introduced throughout the rest of the exhibit. So it's a good place to start, i.e. at the beginning.
And just follow around.
And then follow around. The show is organized according to the 5 themes which we outlined before. So.
But your main exhibit is not the only exhibit that you have there, because you have a very, very good exhibit in the mansion of portraits. Why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Cathy.
Well, the cast of Clarence here is included in a show of work by the junior high school students called In Your Face. And in that show, 3 different classes explore themes in portraiture inspired by pieces in Making Faces. They worked with some of the artists shown in Making Faces, Rigoberto Torres and Claire Jaffa, who is a photographer. And they did some casting. There's also an exhibit of silhouettes that combine writing and image and look at portraits in terms of biography or autobiography.
Excellent, by the way. It's really provocative and excellent, and
Glad you
gives
think
a
so.
wonderful insight into what these youngsters are thinking.
And the final installation is kind of looks at bedrooms, settings as portraits of people, bedrooms as portraits of individuals, but also as time capsules, almost a portrait of the time period.
And it has a video that accompanies that.
Slides that the students took, and an audio tape that accompanies that.
And then, of course, also in the mansion is the Women's Series. And let's talk about that a little bit. What are those?
The Women's Series is an installation on the landing in Glenview Mansion by an artist team called Akins and Ludwig. And what they've done is collect images of women's faces from different areas, and some of them are famous and some of them are anonymous, and the walls are covered with the images of these women, the whole room,
all in the same black frames, and the faces themselves are interesting, but the fact that you see them all gives it an entirely different approach. And then there's another exhibit, which is a continuing exhibit, and one of my favorite artists, Red Grooms.
Well, we were happy to introduce the Red Grooms Astronauts on the Moon into our portrait show, which in fact the Grooms multimedia installation is in fact a snapshot of an actual event and with actual astronauts. So we were able to, as I said, integrate that into portraiture and to talk about setting and etc. So the Grooms was a perfect candidate to have in the Making Faces exhibit.
And certainly belongs at the Hudson River Museum because the gift shop is
which is
Red
one of
Grooms.
our main attractions, the Grooms gift shop from the mid-'70s, which is still a quite delightful installation.
I interviewed Red Grooms when he had the exhibit at the Grand Central Terminal, in which this was a part of the exhibit down there. And he's quite a remarkable guy, isn't he?
He is, and he's actually worked with a number of our classes at the museum junior high school.
I saw some of the things that some of the students had done in a similar vein to some of the things that he has done. And he's a very interesting person. Hands-on, I know you're constantly involved with that, and part of Making Faces is our hands-on projects, the silhouettes, for example. Let's talk about them. What does it consist of?
Well, basically, we feel that the whole concept of interactivity is very important in order to engage our audience. And when we talk about interactives, we not only talk about physical, but we talk about visual and intellectuals. But in this show, we have a few physical interactives. We actually have a photo booth, the traditional photo booth that you would see at a carnival, where you could come in and sit down by yourself or with your family and take some snap portraits. There's also a silhouette booth where you could actually create a silhouette. And what's wonderful is that we'll have a silhouette from the late 18th century on the walls, and then we have a silhouette booth where you could make your own. So again, making a connection between a historical document and a contemporary practice. We also have the mirror, which I'm forgetting the actual name of it, but it's actually you could sit across the table from someone, and through a series of lights and a mirror, you could actually merge the two faces which are sitting across from one another. So again, creating your own portrait and questioning, what is a portrait? Is it an accurate reflection of yourself? Is it a reflection of your family? Is it a reflection of your setting? So these are different types of interactive stations, as we call them, which somehow draw you closer to the themes in the exhibit. hopefully provoke you, to use your word, to look at a painting in a different light or with a better understanding, but also just to make it the experience of coming to the museum and looking at an exhibit a lot more comfortable and relevant to yourself as a viewer, as an individual.
It's an interesting observation. You talk about the mirror that I have made, is that we never see ourselves as we are. Of course, when we look in a mirror, we're seeing everything backwards. We're seeing everything reversed. And when we look at a picture of ourselves, we don't realize that this mark is on this side and not on this side. And when you look at a portrait in a mirror, as you say, perhaps you're seeing something a little different than you normally would. One of the things that we must do is to make sure that we give the telephone number that people can call for further information. Okay. So what is the number? Okay, the telephone number is 914-963-4550. And we'll put that up in the closing credits so people can call that number and get information about the exhibit and future exhibits and other activities that are going on there.
Active 24 hours a day as well.
Well, this is a great exhibit, and I think it's been terrific of you to come over and fill in and show us some of the things that are there and talk about it. I really think that people will enjoy themselves tremendously by going there, and I thank you both for coming here today. I do want to remind our audience of the opportunity to get information about places to go and things to do by sending me a self-addressed stamped envelope. And the address, once again, is Norman Liss, care of Cable Television, and that's at 4 Martine Avenue, White Plains, New York, 10601. And my guests today have been giving us all the information about Making Faces, the exhibit at the Hudson River Museum, and it's been a very interesting and provocative discussion. I suggest that you go to the Hudson River Museum and see this exhibit. And I'm Norman Liss, and the name of the program is The Way to Go. And until next week at this time, enjoy yourself.